Awesome. Where's the button?
Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes.
Welcome to another episode of Therapy Dudes. This is Andre Karkamaz and Dan Fox, and we are talking about, surprise, surprise, teenagers again. Uh, we just can't get enough of this topic. I feel like you wanted to segue straight into a topic around the previous podcast. So,
Yeah. So we've been talking about, this time of year and how to support our kids as they're finishing up with school and getting into the
right.
summer. The
Yeah.
last one was about finishing up school. This is about like having a good summer that feels, meaningful and has enough structure and that's going to help our kids to like continue to grow and get ready for later in life, but also to have some fun and adventures and,
Yeah.
get a nice balance. Um,
Okay.
and we left off last time on this idea of steering versus fueling in terms of how to kind of understand what our parental sort of impact is or our interventions are that we're having with our kids, and that
Yeah.
steering is more controlling and often can add some stress to our kids, which is completely necessary and fine and very appropriate in certain situations. And fueling is more supportive and like adding some energy and helping to soothe their distress so that they have more capacity to kind of go after whatever they want to go after in their own direction. And over
Yeah.
time, the general rule of thumb as our kids are, getting farther along into adolescence is that we want to be fueling more and steering less.
Yeah.
And I think that the summer is something that is increasingly proving challenging for parents of teens. And what I'm experiencing in my work professionally and also in my own family is that once kids hit a certain age where they're kind of aging out of like, younger day camps and summer camps, and, they're hitting 14, 15, 16 years old, oftentimes in the past, this would be time to like start getting out there, finding a job, finding other things that they could be doing in the summer that are really like, moving their life forward. And that what's been happening increasingly over the last few years is that it is harder and harder to find a summer job. And
It
a
is.
lot of kids are finding that the effort that they're putting in doesn't actually pan out. So even if they're like over 16, where a few more jobs open up,
Hmm.
because of the way, the economy is kind of reducing some of the higher skilled jobs and laying off a bunch of people because of AI, we have these people that are pretty qualified that are looking for jobs in the same market as like 16 and 17-year-olds. So it's
Strange, isn't
hard.
it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really different world than even like 5 years ago when people were looking for summer employment. It's much harder to get. I've talked to many families and many teens where the teen is like applied to, 20, 30 places and not had anything come to fruition. And it's tricky and exhausting because the application process can be really, really tedious.
It can be. Especially if you're trying to get if you're coming out of undergrad, trying to get like your entry level job in your field, AI like wipes out most of those applications
Right, right.
before you even see someone real. But yeah, it's frustrating the job market in general right now for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the challenges that this creates, I think, especially for high schoolers, is that it's easy to end up with very little structure.
Yeah.
And often, depending on our kiddo, they will fill that structure with some kind of addictive behavior, whether it's being on their screens for hours and hours and hours every day, or whether it's increasingly turning to experimenting with substances. And
Yeah.
I've seen that especially after freshman and sophomore year, right? The summers after those school years, where there's just not a lot for these kiddos to be doing.
Yeah, they're bored and they want to experience something different, so they get high.
Yeah, and try new drugs and try more of them. And it's it's something that often by the end of junior and senior year is getting a little better self-managed by teens that haven't gotten kind of caught up in that, because by the time you're a junior, your peer group is actually providing a lot of like reinforcement that, hey, we got to be thinking about our future. People are
Yeah.
getting their cars, they're visiting colleges, they're taking the SATs or ACTs. They're like really starting to like lock in on like, hey, I have to like plan for my future and have an idea of what I want to be doing after this high school experience. And often, even if our kiddo isn't quite like dialed in that way, at least the peer group isn't totally kind of unhinged and wild the way sometimes freshman year and sophomore year. Um, Kids are just not really thinking about their future, but just wanting to like maximize social fun. And often the like common denominator there is like drink or smoke weed or
Yeah.
to even more.
Some kind of impulsive behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so figuring out what to do with that, I think is important because
That's
it's
part of a successful summer is like figuring out how to not keep them bored.
right. And I think that there's a balance there, because to be like, oh, we're going to just, program you just like you were in another 3 months of school
No,
is
that's
not right. That's
overregulation.
right. But having like a balance where there's some periods of time where there's maybe less structure, kind of no real external structure, that seems fine. But when that lingers for too long, that seems problematic. So if they can't get a job, we can't just substitute that on the home front very easily by being like, well, your job's going to be to like do all the chores around the house and the yard that I don't
That's not going to go over well.
clean the garage, right?
Yeah.
That's just going to be a gigantic battle. I mean, give it a shot, try to get that structure in place. um, I've been able to be successful with like bursts where it's project based. It's like, okay, we need to like build the chicken coop, and I can get some buy-in for that. But when I've tried to do things like, all right, every day for 2 hours, you're going to just help me with whatever random list of junk I can come up with. That that just seems like
There
it's
was a summer you tried that. I feel like it was like a catastrophe.
I mean, I'm going to go after it to a certain extent again this summer, because of my three kiddos who are, of job age, they're going to be 16, 19, and 21. At this point, none of them have been able to find work, and they've all done like a pretty good effort up to this point at trying to get some employment. So we're in a tricky time for kids, and it's not likely in my family situation. Like I think that none of them are going to get what they would optimally want this summer. And
Hmm.
when it when you don't have some kind of like awesome internship or job set up, the ones that can work, like there are some summer positions like, oh, summer camps that are specifically hiring, young people for that kind of stuff. But you got to want to work with kids.
Yeah.
Um, my son last year, when he was applying for jobs, would go in and they were asking him like, hey, are you going to be available after the summer? And he was like, in one specific case, he's like, no, I'm going back to school. And they're like, oh, sorry, bye. And
Oh,
that's a really tricky dynamic, because that was like one of the two interviews that he had last summer. And it like they would have hired him if he had lied and been like, no, I'm planning on sticking around for a long time. And that's a tricky dynamic for, parents and their kids to navigate in terms of like, what do you want to tell during the interview? Are you trying to like interview to get the job, or are you trying to interview to be like totally brutally honest? And
Yeah, that's interesting. Being in that dynamic as a parent. Like, yeah, lie. Let's get this job.
right, right. And I don't want to like say that's the right answer, because I think that this is a sort of, family decision about
Yeah.
where you draw the line on truth and morality. Um, but you know,
But I feel like everyone's lying on their resumes.
everyone's lying on their resumes. I mean, at least in terms of that question of how long do you plan on being at this job?
Right.
I think if you don't come up with an answer that's like a long, long time,
And
like
they don't want to invest.
right, it's they're gonna find somebody who has like similar, qualifications and is saying that. So it's a tricky dynamic to be in. Um, and it's also something that I feel like is tricky because the job is not guaranteeing you a long, long, long position, right?
Yeah, they're also lying sometimes.
Yeah, or at least not making the same commitments that they expect you to be making.
I just call it lying. Everybody's lying out here. Just remember,
They're all liars.
everybody's
The
lying.
world is
Nobody's being
lying to
honest.
you. Just
Just
lie
do what
back.
works
It's
for
the
you.
only
I'm kidding.
it's the only way.
So, lie constantly. Um, when it comes to the whole job discussion, it's hard, and I understand why you'd want some structure for the kids in the summer, but I also like want to understand from my experience in working with teens in my practice of families and stuff like that, boredom is the killer. And
Mm,
I don't mean you have to be like a parent that like makes sure they have activities all the time. I mean you have to help them understand what would be a positive summer for them. What do they want out of it? Like how to keep them maybe checking in with them about social stuff and how that's going. And a lot of times teens don't talk to their parents about this stuff because they don't feel safe enough, but they'll talk to the therapist about it and it'll be like, oh, like let's resolve this with your friends in this way or something simple, right?
right.
Again, you want to ally your teens, but go ahead.
Well, I would just add one piece to that boredom is a killer. Um, Truths, right? I mean, I think that's accurate with the following caveat that boredom without boundaries to addictive behaviors is a killer, right? Like if you're bored and you're drawn to either getting addicted to your screen or getting farther and farther into substances, then boredom is a huge problem. But if addictive behaviors are out of the equation, boredom can actually be like a necessary um, kind of condition to be able to start to get motivated to get into a new hobby or try a new activity or reach out to a friend group or something like that. And a lot of times boredom is like the precursor to like creativity. And if we don't have those addictive escapes, I think it's okay. The problem is everybody's got a screen that they can have access to. So that's a very easy default addictive escape. And then, at least, in this part of the country, Boulder County, there's a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of permissive substance use amongst adolescents. And that kind of like early addictive, like behaviors getting rooted into their brain for like, what do you do when you're bored, lonely, sad, angry? Oh, just like chase it away with a vape pen. Like that doesn't season well, right? That's going to create a long-term psychological addiction.
Yeah.
So I think we have to know our kid, right? And know like if they're left to their own devices, and I don't mean, literally their screen devices, but if they're just left on their own, will they eventually fill the time with something that is like ultimately going to help them to like figure out how to self-manage and to grow some capacity in their life, or are they likely to go to some addictive escape? Because if it is more likely to be an addictive escape, that's where we have to actually like steer more, right? And
Yeah.
we
How do
talk.
you know if it's more likely to be an addictive escape as a parent and when we have to step in to steer more?
I think the quality of our connection with our kids is going to be what allows us to get a good read on that. And sometimes adolescents are pretty um, secretive and standoffish, and quick to like just kind of push back or get argumentative or just be like, leave me alone, or be evasive. And that in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaged in some problematic behavior, but it does mean that it's going to be hard to figure out how to like get a good read on that. And part of that behavior is definitely just natural adolescents trying to like get independence and figure out how to do things on their own.
Yeah. They're going to push back a little. Yeah. They're
But
individuating.
yeah, but I think that figuring out how to connect with your teen during adolescence is a big deal. There's a great book called The Parent Teen Connection by Susan Casso, Caso, and that's available on Amazon. It's a book I recommend to a lot of families. It really goes through a roadmap for how to connect with your kiddo as they go through these teenage years. And I'd say it's probably the best book I've come across, especially in regards to those pieces around like how do you actually fuel the tank of an adolescent, right? How do you like build those connections and have them feel like, oh, I benefit from this interaction when I hang out with my parents. And
Yeah.
that I think is important to work on. That's the part that we can control as parents, is how to like continue to improve that connection as it shifts over those teenage years. And that'll help us too to be able to like get a good read on what's going on. But ultimately, if your kid is kind of sneaky, um, I think it's important to be able to do some verification. I had a situation with one of my extended family members where their kid, who is a freshman in high school, got caught with a weed vaping device in their backpack. And when I was talking to them about it, I was like, this is an important opportunity to go through all their stuff, right? Like get their phone, check their messages, check their photos, check like whatever's, been going on in terms of their social media, and try to get a sense of the extent of what's happening. And a lot was happening, right? They were posting memes of themselves, smoking in various different locations in the house and just saying how, much they were like jonesing for this substance. And it was like quite extensive. And it was a real wake up call for the parents that A, they had a big problem, and B, they couldn't trust their kid to self report about the extent of what was going on, because most kids in that situation, when they get caught with like a vape pen in their backpack, they're like, "Oh, I'm holding this for a friend." And
Yeah.
the other thing that I told them that I thought they needed to do was to get an accurate baseline, right? If the kiddo is fibbing about that, it's like, okay, well, we're going to drug test you
Oh,
because we need to know. And sorry, this might feel like a violation of privacy and trust, but you're 14. This is illegal, and it's
yeah.
going to cause a lot of like long-term damage to your development.
Yeah.
And that's going to like mess with your brain long term, and also like mess with your future and your ability to succeed like academically and in other aspects of life. And that was the third piece that I was talking to them about, right? One, like get as much information as you can. Two, like verify, right? If you need to do a drug test, do the drug test and have that as an ongoing condition of like, hey, like we're going to drug test you periodically until we're confident you're back on track. But third, to really try to like explain the key messages of why you're worried about them, right? Like what is actually harmful about the substances that they're using. And with weed in particular, the idea that it's not addictive and that it's harmless is
Yeah.
absolute nonsense. And that it's time to, educate your kid if they're into this like kind of problem about like what are the harms, what are the like actual proven like addictive forces of weed, and how does that like addictive cycle go from recreational use to habitual use to dependency to like full-blown addiction. Because
Right.
a lot of kids are like, I'm not addicted, and when they say that to me in the office, I go, yet you're not addicted yet, but if you
If anything, it's a
continue down the
psychological
path that you're
addiction.
on, you will grow an addiction.
Yeah. It's like it reminds me like the parallel that comes up for me is like I think about like the work environment. Sometimes if you have a boss who doesn't connect with you, but just tells you this is how it's going to be, doesn't explain it, and everyone's like, why? Why does it have to be that way? It doesn't make any sense. And the boss never really addresses that, or they don't really ask the boss why, and they grow resentment and see the boss as controlling. And then if the boss just sits down one day and he or she is like, "Hey, this is why we're doing it this way. This is the reason in the background. Like, we'll lose a lot of money if we don't do it this way. It will affect your income, blah, blah, blah." They'll be like, "Oh, I see why we're doing it that way." It's kind of the same between the parent-teen connection. You need to explain things and help them understand how it's beneficial to them so they can come up with the decisions kind of on their own. You want to influence it, but like you're saying, you want to fuel it, not steer it, because fueling it helps them understand and steering it helps them resent.
Yes, well put, well put. Yeah. So I think that that distinction of like understanding and trying to connect and trying to explain why is especially important at this age, because they do feel pretty controlled, right? They're forced to go to school hours every day. They've got a lot of homework afterwards, often other obligations. We tend to give them chores and screen boundaries on the home front. And to include in those boundaries the rationale and what we're trying to help them gain from that, I think is an essential part of like minimizing the amount of like fallout from boundarying them, fallout on the relationship and the connection.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you want the relationship to be the place where they feel safe enough to come to you for ideas if they feel stuck, not come to you to get confined and frustrated and confused and angry, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in terms of how that might play out in the summer structure, um well, for my family, I think what we've been able to do over this current spring break is a nice kind of micro example. So, um, two of our kids are going to the grandparents for most of the week, which is providing some good, structure for that chunk of time, 5 out of the 9 days. And then one of our kids has a band trip that they're doing over spring break. And then the fourth kiddo is hanging out at home. And I've got some, you know, home-based projects that we're doing that are kind of construction-based things on the house. And he's the engineering student and likes using power tools and building things and fixing things. So it's kind of aligned with his interests, and it's something that's definitely needed. These are things I can't really do without another person's help. So uh, I'm excited about that and making progress on that stuff. Um, but I think having that kind of like ability to sort of like be creative and look for, okay, are there like extended family that our kids can be, going and spending time with over the summer? Are there trips that we can take as a family that are going to, help to break up the time? Um, it can be like, we've done road trips where we were camping a lot of the time, and that's been really functional for us and our four kids. A lot of things that we do with the whole family are far less functional, but somehow like being outdoors and camping seems to work.
Seems to slow things down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And like they often don't have like internet connection where we're camping, and somehow just being outdoors and having some like, just space to relax, but also some very like important tasks that are highly relevant, right? It's like if we don't set up the tent, we don't have a place to sleep. If we don't gather wood and
Right.
cook the
It's
food,
gonna
we're
suck.
not eating, right? It's not like a theoretical chore that they just feel like doesn't really matter that much, but it's like got some immediate relevant consequences.
Well, maybe we just throw them out in the wild a lot this summer.
I mean, I am a huge believer of that. I've had kids who have had a harder time kind of like launching into adulthood, who will do things like go on a month long outward bound trip where there are no phones, there is no internet, and they're out in the woods for a month, right? And they come back and they're just kind of like glowing and
Yeah.
having
And they're more
gotten
present and they can have deeper conversations and connect more genuinely. Yeah.
and that's the consistent experience I've seen for kids that go to sleepaway camps where they're gone for a period of weeks and they come back, and families will very frequently report that like this is like they are their best selves when they return from camp. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's simply because they're off their screens. I think it's like because they're in a very positive community based situation, and there isn't sort of the stress and expectation of schools. It's much more focused on like you bond with your cabin group, you bond with the camp, you're doing these outdoor activities that are really like embodied, sensory based, and moving around physically more than you often do during the regular school year. And there's just a lot of benefits that people get physically, socially, psychologically when they're in a program like that, especially if it's something that builds over the years. Because oftentimes kids will age out of summer camp by the time they're in ninth or 10th grade, but some camps have a progression where you can do some adventure programming as you get a little older.
I mean, I feel like adults could benefit from camps. Like, you
Totally.
know, it would have been nice to just keep it going.
Yes. Yes. Andre will sign you up for like an adult basketball camp.
Yeah, there we go.
They actually have
In
those.
the mountains.
I've seen those. I mean, you're in like a dorm at a university or something, but they have those for adults for like a week at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, I
No,
looked
we gotta
into
have
that.
that nature element though, you know.
Right. It doesn't have that same nature element for
We
sure.
gotta make baskets and throw rocks. Um,
Perfect.
yeah.
All right, we're running up against time, but I hope this was helpful. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. We will talk to you next time.
Take care.
Therapy, therapy dudes, take away your stress.